Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Success. A beautiful day here in Joburg on the 27th of May. And we've kind of delved a little bit into a few different parts of fintech over the last couple of weeks. We've had crypto, we've had some digital identity, we've had fraud and risk, we've had AML, and we're coming back to digital identity because it's an extremely hot topic at the moment, not only here in South Africa, but really across the globe. Digital identity and digital keys and everything to do with security and biometrics and authenticating users and people coming into the financial services domain, looking at how you can upsell different services based on someone's profile. So I'm delighted to have someone that I met, Gur, was it about 6 years ago in Nairobi? It must have been.
Crazy.
6 years ago. And we met at some conference, I can't remember which one it was, and we went out for a drink or two or five and a meal somewhere, and we've kind of been kind of friends ever since. I call him a friend ever since. So Gur, lovely to have you on finally. So Gur's the CEO and founder of iiDENTIFii, and that's iiDENTIFii. So you've probably seen them. Making some huge strides in the world of digital identities and KYC, but I'm going to let him kind of delve into what he does and a bit about his background and what iiDENTIFii does as a business. And then we're going to talk about all things digital identity, really, and sort of the importance of that, not only here in emerging markets, but really on more of a sort of a global macro level. So Gur, hope you're ready because I've got a shed load of questions for you. But I'm going to let you start with a quick intro. Just tell us who you are, how you got your lovely locks that I'm very jealous of, and you can tell us about how you founded iiDENTIFii.
Yeah, everyone's talking about face swaps, but we could do hair swaps as well. Hey, digital hair swaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny that you asked. So we actually in town in Joburg for some business, but my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, joined me for the business, and I finally managed to take a picture of her inside Standard Bank, which, as you know, is our pillar customer. And after they became a customer, they actually invested in the business. And I needed to drop off at day school because we were here for a function over the weekend, and then I was going to take her to a local school. But she slept a little bit later. So I said, would you like to come with Dad to a business meeting? I was meeting the head of digital at Standard Bank. She's like, yeah. So I briefed her, I gave her the insight. And it was a really special moment because she was the reason that we started the business. It's like she was, I don't know if I ever shared it with you when we sat in Kenya together. Of how
No, you didn't.
And it was just like a beautiful fusion of Sophie, the reason we started business with Standard Bank, our co-creation partner in the product. And ultimately, they became a shareholder in the business, and they've just been an amazing partner on the continent. So I think the backstory is kind of important. Where about 7 years ago, my wife and I were living in a very small apartment in Cape Town. You come from Joburg and you trade square meterage on a big ratio. And my daughter, Sophie, was 1 year old at the time, and she wasn't learning to walk. It was a very small apartment, a lot of furniture, hadn't learned to walk. And my wife said to me, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this milestone? I was like, love, you're the pediatric, you're the pediatrician in the family, and you're asking the technologist to deal a milestone of a 1 year old who hasn't hit walking yet. So my wife's response was kind of non-medical, and she started to send me all these very expensive houses with large bedrooms, bathrooms, and gardens, apparently to help Sophie walk. And they were just completely out of price range at the time. So I took her down to the Greenpoint Park. And sort of 6:30 to 7:30 every morning, we would walk. I was holding her little hands and feet, and I taught her to walk in 6 weeks. And I was sharing this story with all the nostalgia and warmth and love. And a friend of mine had a very different experience. I was like, wow, what happened? And her helper was pushing their sleeping toddler in a pram. A very well-dressed gentleman, jackets, whole story, approached her. And he had a Virgin Active tote bag. And he walked with her a little bit and said, look, this is how it works. We'll walk together a little bit. You pretend like you know me. I'll pass you the bag. Inside the bag, it's 40,000 Rand cash. And you pass me the pram with a toddler. And that was my response. I was like, what? First of all, I didn't know that this happened at all. Second of all, I didn't know it happened in Cape Town or in Greenpoint Park, which is a multi-million-dollar park, right? And it shocked me because in South Africa, you understand, we kind of live with the reality that people need to put bread on the table. So, someone steals your laptop or your phone or that, you reconcile it. But stealing a child was, for me, a completely different metric and a different lay of the land. And I didn't even know, what would you do with a child? I mean, what? And so I started to research, and apparently what you do is you acquire a child in Africa, and then you can put them through an adoption process, backstreet adoption process. But the people in Europe are adopting what they think is an African orphan. And then the $2,000 is kind of the purchase price. It was even on BBC. There was a Kenyan pediatrician who was bust for trying to facilitate child trafficking. And then the selling price, so to speak, is $50,000. And the delta you have to wash, and you wash it through the banking system. And when we looked at the banking system in South Africa 7 years ago, there was no biometric authentication. You could send a proof of residence, an ID doc, and open an account. And I was like, how do I reconcile this? How do we set off on our mission? So we went to Standard Bank and we showed them what our approach was. And we shared the vision of stopping this identity theft. And because my CTO, co-founder, Marco Wagner, and I were completely aligned, we promised ourselves we wouldn't sell technology that didn't work, because otherwise we're just facilitating this and condoning it. And Standard Bank understood our passion. We had no code, no capital, and no clue, but they understood our vision and our passion. And we were very different in the sense that we weren't just doing selfie to document. We pioneered selfie into the biometric database. And because they understood that, they put us in a separate lane. They had a number of POCs running. We were up against massive US and European businesses, far more mature, far more well-capitalized. But they put us in a separate lane, and we co-created the product. So that's how we launched with Standard Bank as a product. And so today, this morning, literally at 9 to 9:30, she got her little Vita E hot chocolate and a toasted cheese. And I took some pics of her. I'm sending them to you. I took some pics of her standing in front of the Standard Bank sign. And she sat at the table for half an hour listening to WhatsApp chat banking and eventually saying, I'm bored. So that was the experience. But it was a nice fusion.
Well, listen, I didn't know the story. I really, truly didn't. So, I mean, kind of heart-wrenching. I had a podcast last week, actually, with Johnny Bell from LexisNexis Risk Solutions, and he was talking about the work they do in terms of combating not only wildlife trafficking, but human trafficking as well, and how that sort of is still, in 2024, still a thing. I mean, it's just, it beggars belief, really, doesn't it? That people would... Well, anyway, listen, people do what they feel they want to do. But in terms of the story and about, solving a real world problem, there's not too many that I've heard that kind of are deeply rooted as this. So kudos to you and your co-founder for sort of sticking at the journey. Because I imagine the whole world of digital identity over the last couple of years or 5 years has been, quite competitive. There's lots of competitors coming up. There's lots of noise in the market. Everyone wants these types of solutions. So how are you staying innovative in something that is quite binary, I guess, because you either are a person or aren't a person? Is it innovation when it comes to things like combating deep fakes and AI and synthetic IDs? Is that where the innovation happens in your world and your business?
Yeah, I think, no, thanks for the question. And it is an incredibly crowded space. And, I always say, like, we do compete hard. We definitely do compete hard. But the people that we compete with are actually our collaborators, because the competition is on the other side of the dark web, right? So the people who are trying to money launder and trying to human traffic, that's who we're up against. I was actually speaking to a competitor last week, and they were sitting in our office, the CEO, and said, like, I really want to work with you. We'll compete sometimes, we'll collaborate others. I said, we must just go back to basics. The fact that you run a clean, legitimate business where you're trying to make a dent in the universe, where that's financial inclusion, means you're on our side, right? Yeah. And yes, we'll lose to you sometimes, we'll beat you sometimes, but let's not forget the bigger picture, that our real competition, we don't know them. And let me tell you, they're collaborating against us. So I think the sooner that we collaborate, the better. I think that from that mission statement, we got incredibly serious about selling something that truly works, selling something that is externally validated and statistically relevant. So what we never do is, when we share with our clients, we don't do internal assessments of our false accept rates or false reject rates. We outsource that to independent auditing partners, multinational audit partners, and we say, please, can you test our false accept rate and false reject rate? Please, can you test our sample size? Please, can you tell us what we're like in production, right? And then we use that certification to relay to customers that we're serious and that we're rooted in science. And the reason we're rooted in science is because I don't want to make mistakes, right? I don't want to drink my own Kool-Aid or believe my own story. And because of the mission. And that's what's driven the product.
You mentioned the competitors. Sorry, the people that we're targeting, the people that you're trying to sort of block from illicit trade or money laundering, human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, whatever it may be. This isn't just as the movies kind of make it out to be, some sort of individual in a dark cloak wearing a hood sitting there typing. I mean, this is on a massive scale, right? I mean, this is not only sort of organized crime, but it's also state-sponsored as well, from what I understand from the conversations I've had over the last sort of year or two, in this world. It must be, I use this expression a few times, but it must be a case of almost like whack-a-mole, right? I imagine if you're in the world of cybersecurity, it literally is that. You knock one down and suddenly three pop up. In the world of digital identity and the way that you identify an individual and say, yes, this is true, and this is the true likeness of X, or Darren, for example. Is there sort of hackers? Is there illicit people still trying to sort of outdo you and better you in terms of the types of solutions you have in place, or is what you've built pretty foolproof?
Non-stop. It's virus. Yeah. You know how you say whack-a-mole? We internally speak about virus vaccine, and right. There's these aren't individuals in hoodies at internet cafes. These are organized institutions. I think they probably pay a significant premium to what we pay our software engineers. And I think they've got, 2 sets of Dell monitors. I think they've got infrastructure. I think they have offices, and I think they have free lunch and free dinner. And they follow a lot of the models of how to look after staff and incentivize them, because the types of attacks that we see are sophisticated. And they do feel to be constantly iterating, constantly learning. So I think when you say whack-a-mole, it reminds me of how over the 7 years, what have we seen? In the beginning, there was zero biometric. Dan Franks took his ID document and his proof of residence document and submitted it remotely and got a bank account and got a credit card issued to him. And then when identity theft became more prevalent, only then was an introduction of biometrics. But the first biometric was a static selfie. So Darren would take a static selfie from his device and submit it. So he had selfie proof of it and so forth. And then the virus vaccine began and said, so a static selfie, no problem. I'll take a picture of a picture, said the cyber criminal, which they did. Mm-hmm. And then the banks were spoofed. Or the financial services providers were spoofed. So the financial services providers and their technology partners responded with a gesture-based selfie. So Darren, we can't rely on a static image of Darren or a static photo. We now need a wink or a blink, as you're doing now, to prove that you're alive. So can you follow this randomized series of facial gestures? Cool. Now there was a period of quiet, and then identity theft consortiums responded, which was to create a digital puppet from Darren of LinkedIn or another social media image, and take that image and use $49 software. That's all it costs for a year license. Wow. And they would map Darren's static LinkedIn face to the digital puppet and said, okay, this is right pupil, left pupil. This is a smile. This is a head tilt. And we saw digital puppet gesture-based attacks. Right. And then the response came, and we've moved to 3D. And 3D was, I'm no longer interested in a 2D image. I'm no longer interested in a 2D moving image. I now need to detect that it's 3-dimensional. So the first thing that happened is, how do we detect digital screens? Because if it's a digital screen, I know I don't have a real person. And then it developed to, how do we check that there's 3-dimensionality? So Darren's there, and behind him is a tree or a window with a black frame. How do we use AI to detect that? And that's really where most of the market is sitting, on 3D liveness. The challenge is that the identity thieves have evolved beyond 3D liveness. And what I mean by that is that they're using attacks which bypass 3D liveness. So it's important to explain how they do that. If I'm Darren and I'm taking a selfie, all the 3D liveness capabilities is actually leaving the camera on for 1 or 2 seconds and taking a video stream. Now that video stream is then analyzed on the back end or on device, and it starts to analyze video 3-dimensional. But if I did that on a Monday, what the identity attackers are doing is that they're video recording, so to speak, for simplistic terms, or that onboarding. So they'll take that video stream and they'll record it by means of man-in-the-middle attack or malware, and they'll take that video recording and they'll play it back on a Wednesday. And that's the challenge. So what happens on a Wednesday is that I've got and I bypass the system on a Wednesday, because I have a digital replay attack. Now that digital replay attack is what we are seeing as the most common attack vector. And that's why we focused on 4D liveness. And the 4D liveness defends the Monday to Wednesday attack. So what we do is we flash, and together with our international partner, iProve, we flash a unique series of colors on the individual's face. And that will show us that on Monday, that unique color set was used. On Wednesday, we choose another randomized sequence of colors. So if Monday's recording is played back to us on Wednesday, we know that that is the wrong series of colors in the wrong sequence, because Wednesday's API token has coded for a different series of colors. And that's why we detected it. And that's why we focus on 4D liveness for very high-risk transactions. And that's where the change has been made.
And are you seeing, because, it wouldn't be 2024 if we didn't mention AI. I think we've already mentioned it once or twice. Are you seeing that, maybe not with the iiDENTIFii system because of what you've just explained with the 4D sort of rendering and the color imagery, but maybe some older models that are out there, we were mentioning names, that they are, it's quite easy now for hackers to be able to use AI to recreate an individual, whether it be, a static image, whether it be the 3D image that you were talking about. Some of the tools that are available just as a layman coming into the market, as a non sort of technologist, right? I can go and clone Morgan Freeman's voice, in 10 seconds. And I would imagine with the amount of deep fakes that we're seeing all across the news and what have you, is that a big problem? Or do you think that's more of it kind of was a problem, but it's a very easy one to go and solve?
It's a big problem. So it's a big problem. And if you look at, you were talking about Morgan Freeman's voice and creating digital voice impersonations. There was a blogger that was a member. He was a member. He's he's not a cyber criminal. He was a journalist, but an investigative journalist and a smart one. And he created a voice clone of himself so that there was no crime committed. And he used 3 seconds of his voice. He used a software again online and created a voice clone of it. And what he did was he used his voice clone to log in to a major European bank. I mean, it's in the press, but I don't want to name any players or any brands. And he logged in using his voice. And he then said to the bank, "This is what I've done." And of course, there was no criminal consequence because he only hacked his own account. But voice is seeing constant attacks. Face is seeing constant attacks. And that's why, as you say, it's whack-a-mole, it's virus vaccine, the level of intelligence, because there's so much money behind money laundering, the amount of engineering efforts, the amount of AI that can be allocated, the amount of R&D and innovation. I think that we underestimate, or we don't consider how well structured these organizations are and how they are learning from the tools that are available. There's a number of South American countries who, South America is probably the leader in identity theft attacks. So if you can survive South America, you can probably roll out across the rest of the country. And the attacks there are incredibly unique and incredibly aggressive. And it is an ongoing struggle and ongoing work. So you cannot rest on your laurels.
So let's talk about sort of the user cases behind iiDENTIFii and digital identity. So we've obviously got account creation, right? So I go to a bank, Standard Bank, because you mentioned them already. I go to Standard Bank. I want to open a new account online. I go through the process. It asks me to take a selfie. I go through that. It's very simple. I've done it before, and I go and open a bank account. That's awesome, right? For account opening. Where else are there sort of user cases to use digital identity? Are you seeing any specific trends, either here in South Africa or across the continent? And where do you see those? A lot of questions, but where do you see the future going?
Absolutely. So currently we see it post-enrollment. So what you described is we call enrollment. And then there's subsequent verification or subsequent authentication. And that can be, I want to log in subsequently, right? So even at login level, that's number one. The second thing is high-risk transactions. So all of a sudden, Darren pays his normal beneficiaries, their normal amounts at a normal time of month end. That's okay. But now Darren wants to buy a Porsche online remotely. It's a high ticket item. We haven't seen it before. It's an unusual expenditure. It's a highly liquid tradable asset. It can also drive across the border. So now we want to step up on a risk-based approach and authenticate Darren's face there and then before we allow the transaction. So that's a second. The third is if you're resetting your username and password. Very high risk transaction because those are the keys to the castle. And then the fourth can be a device reset. So what we've done with another bank in South Africa is when you lose your device, you can literally walk into one of the telco providers, buy a new device, and using your face, reinvigorate the entire banking app on a brand new device that's never seen you with what we do, which is termed beyond, what we've called it is beyond device biometrics. So you're not using the native iOS or Android on device, using beyond device because we work server side, and you can reinvigorate that entire account. And that's just in the banking sector, and across all the different sectors that we work, the use cases are multi-factor. Whether it's revenue authorities or public sector, there's a lot of use cases per vertical.
And if we stay on sort of financial services, I mean, it's always it's baffled me that if I want to go and set up a crypto wallet, and it gives me those sort of 12 different sort of words that I have to write down and keep somewhere, which is nigh on impossible, right? But you do not think there's some sort of user case for these crypto sort of wallet holders to use a system like yours, so you can access a hard wallet, using, I know it's not online, so there is that sort of, how do you do that? But, rather than having that sort of 12-word pass key or whatever they call it, to use some form of digital identity to be able to access hard wallets. I mean, there was that case in the UK. I don't know if you read. The guy lost, whatever it was, £20 million worth of Bitcoin because he'd lost his key or forgotten his key. It's things like that. I just wonder whether there's any sort of models there. Is it something you're looking at? Because obviously crypto is a big thing now, globally, but certainly here across the continent.
Absolutely. I mean, losing 20 million because there should be a backup process, right? So either you go to the branch of the bank and you put your fingers on the glass fingerprint reader and you prove who you are, and and crypto by its nature is unique in its anonymity, and every the strength of that anonymity, every light casts a shadow, is this particular example. So I am of the look. I'm steeped in biometrics, so I see the applicability everywhere I look. Just because if you have a hammer, you're looking for a nail. I think that on-device biometrics, off-device biometrics, and pass keys are an incredibly powerful combination. So if I can engage my crypto wallet and I can have I have a MacBook and I have an on-device biometric, that's particularly powerful. But if somebody bypasses my password to log in, they can add another profile to my finger. So the combination of having off-device, beyond-device biometrics, plus on-device biometrics, plus a key code, and those three to actually access, and in the instance of losing one, at least two, I think would stop the kind of fraud that you mentioned.
So listen, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to fintech, right? It's probably the unstatement.
Reputation.
right? Yeah.
reputation.
Yeah, I know. So let's talk about payments for a minute. Okay. Now there's a lot of talk about using biometrics for payments. I know this is available in China. You walk up to a POS device and you look at it, scans your face, and you make a payment. Is that a form of digital identity? Is that something that iiDENTIFii could get involved in? You could leverage your technology to be able to offer that to payment service providers, anywhere globally, because you have that authentication that arguably is beyond, a tap of a card or a swipe of a watch or whatever it may be. But to actually use someone's face when it's a 4D rendered model with all the different technologies you were talking about, in order to make a payment, do you see that as being the future? What's your view?
I think it's the present. I mean, you can already see that there are payments in retail environments in the US, there are payments in Europe, and it's here already in Africa, as well as the demand for incredibly fast payments. If you look at the PayShap system that's been rolled out, and you're looking to make peer-to-peer payments from mobile to mobile, right? Depending on the quantum, there's a huge opportunity and gap for authenticating those payments using face. And like anything, the faster you move, the more mistakes are made. So with this demand for immediate payments, which is completely understandable and justified, right? Because the economy and the GDP grow, the quicker funds transfer. So whether it's money remittance, whether it's immediate payments, whether it's payment service providers, we are seeing an increasing demand for systemic OEM solutions for digital identity and face authentication. And then it's about the quality of your ability to do system integration. One of the things that we focus on, this isn't a drop and go kind of industry. It's not a box dropping industry. Here's your server, we plugged it in, there's some air conditioning on it, and we'll monitor remotely. Cheers. You really have to wrap data analytics and really wrap system integration around it. And that's the beige, boring part that you don't see on the website. But when you go to a payment service provider and you say to them, hey, here's the kit, and you leave, they'll only find out about the challenges of that 6 months down the line. And what we've learned it was the pressure we were under, but I'm grateful for it now. The banks, the tier one banks that we've closed are incredibly demanding, right? They're not easy clients. And the balance of power between us and them is towards them. And so the demands on which transaction failed, when did it fail, how did it fail, why did it fail, what device did it fail on? We had to build out from day one huge data sets, huge data data dashboards, and a data team. Because the banks can't capacitate that at the speed. And that is what I think the payments providers are going to start demanding as well. They're like, if you're going to do our biometrics, do it as a service. Don't do it as a box drop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can see that. I do have another question for you. Maybe slightly controversial, but maybe not actually. Digital identity, when it comes to financial inclusion, okay, specifically if we're looking at the very lower LSM that perhaps can't afford, the iPhones and the Samsungs of this world, how does that work? Is there workarounds, or is this just a case of, well, we're just going to have to wait for, evolution and even, the price of smartphones to come all the way down so everyone can use digital identity?
No, I don't think it's a controversial question. I think it's really on the money. So, as I said, we started our business with a passion for identity theft. Then we made a trip to Zambia. Yeah. And each country is different, and you get to know them, the individuals, when you're on the ground. And the level of the street smart and savvy and entrepreneurship combined with the lack of financial inclusion, you hear financial inclusion everywhere. It's become such a cliche. Everybody puts it on their website. Everybody's busy with it. But when you actually meet the people who are off the charts smart, who are off the charts, educated, but now they can't get the loan to do the next thing, you just see how people drop off the cliff of their own potential, and it's heartbreaking, and it's real.
Absolutely.
Financial inclusion is a major focal point for us. And if you look at our shareholders, Arise and Invest, their major goal is financial inclusion on the continent of Africa. So they traditionally traditionally invest in banks to facilitate financial inclusion. Big banks across the continent. So Cal Bank, DCFU, or EcoBank, right? These are big banks. when they approached us for investment, I said, Gerrit, what's going on here? We're a fintech. We're not a bank. The check size that you're writing here compared to what you're usually writing is. And he said, it's about financial inclusion for us. If we can drive digital identity inclusion to financially include those individuals into the banking sector, now we're getting our portfolio to work with synergies. Now the challenge is, how do you do it? There are a couple of challenges. You've spoken about an iPhone or a Samsung. You'll be surprised by the level of lower end cheap handsets that we're exposed to across the group from Stanbic or from an ABSA, right? Investec not so much, but Stanbic and ABSA across the continent, we see Android Go devices, right? They're running a completely different operating system to Android. We see the Mobicel trendies. We see the Nelson Mandela phones. We see 800 Rand phones when they were new that have been dropped and cracked many, many times. Our tech is designed to work on that, because when we launched with Standard Bank, that was one of the demands. So we needed highest security on low-end handsets. But you do need a smartphone. And that's why we built out all the data intelligence to see which devices were failing, so that we could proactively go to the bank and say, hold on, what's going on with this one device? And we could solve and heal consistently our tech for those devices. But here's the kicker. You do need a smartphone. So whether it's an 800 Rand or a $40 smartphone, you still need a smartphone because you need a camera. So the way that we approach that is family members, right? Because we're not relying on on-device biometrics. If your daughter or your son or someone in your family network has a smartphone, you can onboard yourself using someone else's device because it's still your biometric. So number one is, is tap your family network. All we need to see is your face so we can onboard you. Number two is, instead of bringing the individuals to include them, they've got to travel to the banks. No, bring agents to financially include the individuals. And there are a number of unbelievable businesses whose core focus that is, where they're bringing multimodal devices. If you look at Paycode, they're bringing multimodal devices to bring digital identity to the convenience of the individual. Now that's proper. That's proper financial inclusion. So partnering with businesses like those, and then and that's on the agent side. And then how do we hop, skip, and jump over citizen identity? Just because the government hasn't issued you a national identity doesn't mean you can't be financially included. You don't need to be identity included to be financially included, because we can advance services to your biometric. Right? If I see your face and I know it's your face and you repaid me the $5, I don't need to know Darren repaid me. I need to know that your face repaid me. So when you ask me for 10, I go, well, I've seen him before, or I've seen her before. I'm going to re-advance. I don't need to know your name and surname. I just need to know that you as an individual are good for the credit, so I can grow. I, as a financial institution, can contribute to the growth of GDP through all of these massively talented people. And just because the government fails them doesn't mean, at that point in time, doesn't mean that the financial services sector should delay and wait for government to catch up. So those are the kind of sets of ethos.
I guess the challenge on the last part is, given the requirements and the compliance and rules from the SARB and the FICA and FIC and what have you, to be able to go through that sort of check by check bullet point of KYC, proof of address, proof of ID, proof of this, proof of this, until that changes or adapts, I think there's still quite an uphill struggle for, certainly, and you're talking about what I gathered from that sort of microfinance, micro lenders, to be able to say, actually, Darren, I don't know who you are, I don't know who you are, or what your ID number is, I don't even know where you live, quite frankly, but based on your profile, I know that you're a good customer, because you repay your loan, and you've taken out 2 loans with me of $10 and you've paid it all back within 7 days. Great. That's all I need to know. But that's probably not enough for the SARB, for SARS, for FICA, and what have you. So I guess there's a lot of work in terms of the regulatory side that you as an industry, sort of the AML, RegTech industry need to do in working with regulators to, I suppose, educate and make them aware of, what this technology can do, how it can be financially inclusive without breaking any of the sort of compliance checks and balances that are enforced. Having said that, with grey listing in certain countries in Africa, certainly over the last 6 months or so, we've seen 4 or 5 now. I imagine there's going to be more pushback from regulators. Say, "Whoa, listen, we need to know literally the inside, leg measurement of the consumer before we can, onboard them and mark them as KYC." What I'm saying, is that making sense, or is this not a problem whatsoever? And actually, because it's microtransactions, regulators aren't that bothered, or?
You've said so much, and it's a real pleasure speaking. I mean, we've known each other for years, but it's a pleasure speaking to someone who's so well versed and on the ground and realistic. I think the question goes back to the culture of the businesses that are moving the needle. And the two thoughts that I have in mind is, one is a radical but respectful radical candor, something that obviously we learned from Ray Dalio and his book, The Principles, and idea meritocracy from Ray as well, and then disrupt, right? Disrupt. So, and not disrupt to cause chaos, disrupt to cause significant advancement. And that's deeply embedded in our DNA, and that's how we started, right? No one was referencing the government image. No one was doing remote KYC. We got the first legal opinion that audited from an attorney perspective, coagulated and combined information from the technology audit that we got to go to the bank and say, you can do this. You don't have to be in branch, right? Was it disruptive? Yes. But was it disruptive for significant leapfrog advancements? Yes. And what we're doing now is pushing those frontiers again. And these are intelligent regulators, right? These individuals they're smart. They understand the impact on GDP. And if you have the right credibility and the right networks at a government level, at a regulator level, as long as you can present ideas that are meritocratically superior, and you can present the uplift for benefit for citizens in their country, and you understand taking from a white tower in Cape Town and trying to force your tech on the ground in Africa, you work roots up and regulator down, then we find them to be incredibly responsive, and you can move the needle because you can prove it scientifically. And if you can prove it scientifically, you get people's ears. And that's what we're doing.
Amazing. That's fantastic. I'm pleased. And I must say, the interactions I've had here with regulators, and being in sort of roundtables, they're not there to stifle innovation. They're there to protect consumer, protect business. And I think as long as you're showing and you're backing things up based with data, right, and science, then there's usually a very candid conversation that happens. So I'm delighted to hear that from you as well. Gur, before we go, in terms of what's next, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out now and give it a little shine. Where do you see your world in the next couple of years? I'm not going to go further than a couple of years because that's just crazy, right? Then we really are into crystal ball territory. But in the next couple of years, where do you see iiDENTIFii as a business? What do you see? What challenges do you see either coming up or you guys solving?
So I think the challenges that are coming up, and I can't tell you the exact timeline, obviously, or the exact depth of the challenges, is obviously quantum computing and the huge force that to the type of attacks that we'll see. And the reality is those are big problems to solve. And I don't think it's problems that we're arrogant enough to consider we will solve alone. That is where ourselves and the competitors, in inverted commas, or let me rather say the collaborators in our industry, we need to now collaborate because we're up against a huge wave. We need to share data, we need to share optics, and we need to form a neighborhood watch to alert each other as to what's going on. And that's why, for me, I'm very keen to speak openly and honestly on the forensics that we see and relate those to other players in our market. And I think the silo effect between collaborators in our industry is detrimental. If we can get together and start to share anonymized data subject to the approval of our clients to support each other's defense systems, that'll be huge. So where I want to move us is forward much more to a collaborative culture with other players in the market. There's more than enough business for everyone. And deal with threats as a united force. So for me, that is a key item. The second thing is, I think that we do see a wave where we are able to power digital and financial inclusion together with identity inclusion in a non-traditional way, right? So the proof of residence, right? So you could tell me your address and I'd find it on Google Maps. But in high density areas, you can't tell me your address. You need to send me a short code. Now, it's understanding those short codes. It's becoming more than just a simple identity player and collaborating with data sources which are very unique to push and disrupt the status quo and say, I don't have an address because this individual doesn't have an address, but I've mapped this individual to a short code. I've combined it with a face authentication. I know where this individual really is and how can we empower them? So that's the second. And the third is collaborating with smartphone manufacturers to move the needle from the 25 or 27% to proper smartphone inclusion. It's not something, again, that we can do as on our own, but we can do with our partner banks. So the partner banks do speak very closely to the Android developers and Android handset manufacturers and say, can you come into these countries and take a long view? Let's not focus on the $40 handset. Let's look at the lifetime value of this individual, and let's empower this individual with a simple device that can unlock that person's GDP, that person's potential, and really drive growth in this country off your platform. And doing that in a way, and this is the kicker, that respects the autonomy and the privacy of that individual's identity. We should be very careful. I mean, what we've seen with certain online shopping platforms, you think you're shopping for very cheap and affordable products, but actually that app is interrogating your entire online identity and your device identity. And that we have to steer very clear of, because these individuals they're not necessarily completely literate in what identity metrics they're exposing. It has to be hyper respectful and put the power back in the hands of the individual. And I know we're all talking about it. I'm kind of short self-sovereign identity in the next 2 years, but long in the next 5 years. And I think that putting the identity truly back in the consumer's hand on a device that's Android affordable and sponsored so that they can recycle their identity across banking, telco, health services, that's going to be a very, very exciting time for everyone in this industry and for iiDENTIFii.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been lots of attempts of different manufacturers coming into Africa on the telco side, on the handset side, that have, tried to make it either, extremely affordable with very basic services. And then there's a compromise sometimes on security or on, what data is being sold on or being allowed to then leave device and what have you. So I think there's that balance. Clearly it's a commercial venture. You need to make sure that you can make some sort of profit from selling handsets, but then you also need to make sure that you're putting in the hands of consumers who perhaps aren't as financially literate as others, or technology literate as others, that understand actually what they get themselves into. We wax lyrical on stage about how many people actually read terms and conditions of anything they sign, right? Whether you're downloading an app on on iStore or you're signing an insurance. Do you really read? And if you do read, you really understand every word? I think even the most educated people would struggle. So I think there is a financial education side, and there's literacy and there's education. I think that for me, they're two different things. But I think being able to educate people in terms of what things mean, what is security, what is your digital identity, because that can scare people. If people have never heard that. So you're taking a picture of me, you're storing it somewhere, and then what are you going to use it for? So I think there is that whole sort of narrative around explaining why this is. It's a bit like, why should you keep your money in a bank and not under your mattress? Well, there are reasons, but culturally it can be, quite an uphill struggle to try and explain. Anyway, that's one for another time. Listen, Gur, I'm going to put some links on this so people can find you on LinkedIn. I know you're very active. Can find iiDENTIFii. I'm going to link to some of the other articles that you've posted recently as well, because they're extremely insightful, not only for a geek like me, but for anyone that's interested in the world of fintech and payments and digital ID and what have you. And I thoroughly enjoyed you having on. It was only 6 years. But I didn't have a podcast 6 years ago, so that's my excuse anyway.
Thank you. And yeah, also just to reciprocate, thanks for having us on. Absolutely love your work. It's so fresh. It's so direct. It's truly innovative. I wouldn't say that I would have just ended with thank you very much, but your stuff is really cool. So please maintain the quality of the guests that you've had on. Just real great thought leaders, real various topics for us, and the conversational style is just so authentic. So Darren, thanks. You're doing an unbelievable job, and we really appreciate you from the community side.
Well, that's very kind. Gur, thank you very much. I'll let you get back to your daughter in Joburg, because I'm sure you've got another meeting to take her to, maybe the Golden Arches or somewhere like that. Who knows? But enjoy Joburg, and I'll catch you very soon.